we're going to be talking about solving systems of equations with matrices. And so you have to understand about, first of all, the dimensions of a matrix. And so matrices talks about rows and columns. So the number of rows and columns is represented like R by C, where the R stands for rows and the C stands for columns. So a matrix, when you look at it, looks something like the following. What I would do is, for example, I would have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a matrix. And what you would see is that this matrix and the number of rows in this would be 2 and the number of columns would be 3. So if I talked about R by C, that's really saying there are 2 rows by 3 columns. So what you would see is that the rows, here's row number 1, here's row number 2, and then the columns would be the ones that are going vertically down, 1, 2, 3. So that's kind of important to know. And an inverse matrix in the second part is a matrix that we'll see in our calculator later. It looks like this. It'll say A with a box around it looking like thing with a little -1 above it. That will produce an identity matrix when multiplied by the matrix A. And you'll see how that works within the context of our problems shortly. So let me just show you how that would work when we're doing some of these examples. We're going to do a bunch of examples. We'll do probably 4 examples that are simplistic, and then we'll do another, I think, 3 or so that are embedded in a word problem. So we talked about substitution elimination before, solving by graphing. And now what would happen is, in the next thing, we're going to talk about how to set things up as matrices. So let's say, just for example, we're looking at number 1. And the way that I would write problem number 1 in the set of matrices is I would write it like this. I would say that I have the first matrix being 6, 4, 3, and -1. Notice that these numbers come from the coefficients of all the different variables. So you see the 6 matching up with the 6, you see the 4 matching up with the 4, you see the 3 matching up with the 3, and we don't see the -1, but the -1 is where that negative sign is, and that's where this -1 is coming from. And then the second part is that we have right next to it a matrix box that contains the 2 variables x and y, which are the 2 variables that are in our equation. And then that's equal to a matrix that contains the last 2 numbers on the right-hand side of the equation, which are -14 and 17. And those 2 numbers, of course, are coming from the numbers -14 above, and down below you see that we have the number 17, and that's where this 17 is coming from. So this is just how you would write it in matrix form. So then what you're going to do is you're going to go into your calculator, and I'm going to bring up your calculator next so you can see kind of how that would be entered in. So when I go to my calculator, what I see is I want to get to the matrices, and down here below on the left-hand side, right above the x to the -1 button, you see that there is a word that says matrix. So we're going to go with second matrix, and this brings us into our matrices. Then you're going to arrow over to where it says edit and hit enter. After you hit enter, you have to set the dimensions of the matrix. And if you look back in our notes, you'll see that we have a 2 by 2 matrix. So 2 rows, 2 columns. So in my calculator, I'm going to put down 2 and then arrow over and go 2 for the number of rows and columns. The first number is the number of rows and the second number is the number of columns. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter in the numbers that I saw, just as I saw them on the paper in our notes. So the first one was a 6, and then the next one was a 4, and the next one was a 3, and the next one was a -1. And I enter in all those. So now this is called matrix A. So if I go back to my notes, I want to remember, of course, that this matrix is called matrix A. And then I go back to my calculator, and the numbers that were on the right-hand side, I'm going to enter in matrix B, so I go second, matrix, I arrow over to edit again, but this time I want to work with matrix B. So I arrow down to matrix B and hit enter, and this matrix has 2 rows and 1 column, so it's a 2 by 1 matrix. The first number was a -14, and the second number was 17. And this is called matrix B. So in my notes, I'm going to go back and make sure that I remember that this is called matrix B. Now, if I want to find the solution of this matrix, what I'm going to do to find my x and y answers is I'm going to take matrix A inverse and multiply that by matrix B. And what this will give me is my solution of my x and y values, which is where these 2 lines are intersecting. So in my calculator, if I were to do that, what I would be doing is I would go to the home screen, so I'd quit out of the matrices, and then I'd go matrix, and I see matrix A is now highlighted, so I hit enter, and then I do inverse, which is directly below the matrix button, and I press that, so that's inverse, and then I multiply that by, and then I go matrix, which is second, that x minus 1 button. I arrow down to the B matrix and I hit enter, and then I hit enter one more time. And these numbers that come up, 3, -8, are the x and y value of where these 2 lines cross. So in my notes, the number 3, -8 is the solution. So I would write down that my x and y coordinates are 3 and -8. And the way that we would have talked about that in the past is we would have said that these 2 lines cross at the coordinates 3, -8. And matrices is just a different way that we can solve a system of equations with these advanced calculators. So now I'm going to do the same thing again with all the rest of these. It's very important that when you do this, that you see in every single case that the x's line up on the left side of the equation, that the y's line up on the left side of the equation second, and then lastly, on the right side of the equation, that the numbers line up. Otherwise, you cannot use matrices. So as I solve the next system of equations, I'm going to set up my boxes so I know what to put in my matrices. And so in my first matrix, my A matrix, this time, I'm going to have 7, -2, 3, and +4. Your second matrix will always be x and y, or whatever 2 letters they're using. There will always be an equal sign. And then my last matrix is what you see in the purple highlight, which is the set of numbers on the right-hand side of the equation. And don't forget, that means, of course, that I'm going to be doing the A inverse matrix times the B matrix in order to make that work. So now I'll go to my calculator, and when I find the answer, what's going to end up happening, and the way you can write it on your test, is that your x and your y values will be equal to some matrix. There should be a set of coordinates. So now I go into my calculator. And when I go to matrices, I go second matrix to get there. I want to go to edit, so I go over to the edit menu. I hit enter. Notice that I already have a 2 by 2 matrix, so I don't really have to do anything with it. I can hit enter, enter, and then get into the numbers. And I have 7 and -2 and 3 and 4. And this is my A matrix. And then if I go back into matrices again, second x -1 button, go to edit. You always have to go to edit. This time we're going to edit the B matrix, which is still a 2 by 1 matrix. And these numbers are 33 and 19. When I quit out of here, I just do the same thing I did before, which is I go matrix A, take its inverse, which is the button right below math, and then you can just go matrix and then select B, not the edit menu, just the matrix itself, and hit enter again, and you get the solution set of 5, 1. This means that those two lines are crossing at the coordinates of 5, 1. So let's write that down. I know that my answer is 5, 1, which again, if I would have written in coordinates like we did in the past, I would have written as 5, 1. Those are the x and the y coordinates. So here's x and here's y, just like up above where the x was 3 and the y was -8. In problem number 3, what you'll notice is that the first equation needs to be rearranged.